Languages are an important part of real life, and they should be an important aspect in your tabletop role playing games as well. In most systems, you get languages upon character creation, and you can make decisions to get more, such as the race you choose, the background or feat you choose, spending downtime, money, or experience points to acquire more language skills. These choices should matter, like all choices should in role playing games. A core aspect of RPGs is putting obstacles and challenges in the way of your players and letting them figure out their own solution. Language barriers should be an obstacle, and not just hand-waved away for convenience sake. In D&D, you have Common, and most other systems and worlds will have some sort of equivalent. This is a trade language that most NPCs and virtually all PCs will know. A lot of DMs use that and go, oh, well, everyone knows Common, so language is never an issue. And if you want to run your games that way, that's fine. DMs have a lot of plates to balance, and keeping track of language barriers can be a nuisance. I'm not going to tell you how to run your games. But I am going to tell you how I think you should run your games. Yes, most characters in a D&D world know Common. But you can put some restrictions on it to make languages more interesting in your world. Now, I specialize in the Forgotten Realms D&D setting, so I'm going to be referencing it a lot in my examples, but you can apply these principles to any world. I'm on Ed Greenwood's Discord, and I've recently asked them about the Common Tongue. In the Forgotten Realms, it is a full-fledged language in that world. It's just as useful as any other language, except even more so because so many people know it. You can have deep philosophical discussions with it, you can write books with it, political debates will probably be conducted in Common, and laws will be written in it in most of the Sword Coast. So it might seem like it's a convenient catch-all that makes language options useless, but there are a few things you can still do with it. The first advice I can give you is not every adventure needs to be set in the Sword Coast, or if you're running a homebrew world, it doesn't need to be set in a very diverse location where everyone and their mother knows Common. In Thay, people speak Thayan. In Aglarond, people speak Aglarondan. Now, many people will still know Common in these places, especially merchants, shop owners, and other individuals whose jobs involve interacting with many foreigners. They will speak Common fluently. But other people within the country might only know a little bit of Common, and you might find it's not a very useful language if you're trying to get information from a rural farmer, or maybe an elitist noble who refuses to stoop to speaking in any language other than his people's. Maybe the person whose house you're breaking into speaks fluent Common, but the journal you're stealing will be written in their native tongue, whatever that may be. Most people's first language isn't Common. It's a trade language you learn out of necessity. It's not the language you're most comfortable with. Speaking of that, let's discuss eavesdropping. Let's say you were talking to a storm giant, and you convinced him to gather the rest of his giant allies and help you fight against the evil army. He just needs to go notify his second in command and organize everything. But your DM mysteriously asked you for an insight check. You pass, and you notice something's off. He seems uncomfortable, nervous, and a little shady. Now you're suspicious. So when he goes to a private room to talk to another giant, you cast clairvoyance to eavesdrop on the conversation. Now both of these giants know Common. They're fluent in it and they speak it perfectly fine. But it's not their native language. It's not the language they grew up speaking with their kin, and it's not the language they're most comfortable with. So when speaking to another giant they are close with, why would they speak Common? They wouldn't. They'd be speaking giant. Not because they want to keep their conversation secret, but they might be doing that too, but because that's what they naturally would do. It's comfortable to them, and they probably would do it without even realize they're doing it. Now, a lot of DMs would probably overlook that. Not even intentionally. It's just a small detail that's really easy to forget about in the middle of a session. DMing is hard, and it can be difficult to remember every little thing, so if you forget about something like that, don't worry about it. I forget something I planned on doing literally every single session I run. It's going to happen, and it's fine. But if you can remember it, it can be a fun moment. Now the wizard needs to stop concentrating on clairvoyance so that they can ritual cast comprehend languages and then cast clairvoyance again. They still get the eavesdrop and probably learn some useful information, but it puts a wrench in their plans. The wizard had to spend an additional 3rd level spell slot, and he missed the first 10 minutes of the conversation. Maybe he missed some important context, and now it's harder to piece together what he did here. Maybe the wizard picked giant as a language they knew at character creation, or they're a Goliath that already gets it, and now they don't have to waste 10 minutes and a spell slot. They get to immediately listen in on the conversation, which means a seemingly small choice they made at character creation ends up mattering and helping the party in a tremendous way. As a player, that kind of thing feels amazing. Another strategy you can implement is with monsters. A lot of the time in D&D, you're not dealing with regular people in a city. You're dealing with monsters out in the wilderness or in a dungeon. The primitive lizard folk tribe who live in the swamp don't have any reason to know common. Maybe one or two of them know some common because they've needed to act as a spokesperson when dealing with travelers or another faction in their swamp, but even then, they will not be fluent in it. Their common will be rough, and they will only be able to get out very simple ideas, and might even mess up and use the wrong words that confuse the players. Now, that's all useful in the Forgotten Realms and other typical settings, but not every common language is a full-fledged language. Let's take the Mike Pondsmith Cyberpunk universe. The most recent edition of the Cyberpunk tabletop game is Cyberpunk Red, which takes place in 2045. In that game, the common equivalent is street slang. Now, maybe it's a full-on Creole language by 2077, but in 2045, when the tabletop takes place, it is only a Pidgin language. A Pidgin language is simplified, its vocabulary and grammar are limited, and is usually just bits of other languages mashed together. It's based off of city speak from Blade Runner. Point is, you might be able to ask for directions, ask how many Ironside's gang members are guarding this warehouse, or give someone your restaurant order all in street slang. But if you want to talk to the Neuralware professor at Night City University about the new advancements in neural chip interfaces being pioneered by Militech subsidiary Kunishita Chipware so that you can distract them while your tech uses a brute force program on his personal computer to bypass the password so he can access his emails and use them as blackmail? Well, that's too complicated for street slang. You need to use a full language. Probably English. I imagine Night City University requires all their classes to be conducted in English, but they might know another language too. Sometimes street slang might work, if you explain it well enough. Technically, according to Cyberpunk Red's rules, you need a base 10 in a language to be considered fluent, and at character creation, you are only required to put 2 points into street slang, so assuming you don't put in more, if your intelligence is less than 8, you're not even fluent in it. Now, a lot of GMs ignore this, and that's fine. I tend to ignore this rule for native languages. Technically, if your int is low enough, you can even not be fluent in your own native language, which doesn't really make any sense. But for street slang, I enforce this because it can be fun to play around and rewards high intelligence characters. Maybe they handwave it most of the time when getting very basic ideas across, but the second your conversation becomes anything more than extremely simple, the GM could call for a street slang check if you have lower than a base 10. And if you have a base 10 or higher, you would just automatically be able to talk without a check, unless the conversation gets even more in-depth, in which case they might say you need to make a check no matter what your base is, or in the case of the previous example, just flat out say street slang doesn't work. I know this seems very specific to Cyberpunk, but you can apply this line of thinking to languages in any game, including D&D. Maybe common in your D&D world is more of a Pidgin language, used to get very simple ideas across. If your players are trying to do more with it, have them make an intelligence check with proficiency to see how well they can get their idea across. The bottom line is, part of RPGs is having obstacles that your players must find a way around. Languages can be one of those obstacles and oftentimes lead to interesting situations, like when the low charisma, low intelligence barbarian is the only one that can talk to these ogres. This also gives a chance for characters' decisions to matter. As a DM, it's part of your job to make sure a player gets to use every aspect of their character at least once. Make sure the skills, languages, spells, etc. end up mattering and are useful to the adventure. Obviously, if you're doing a one-shot, that's impossible, but do your best. This video was specifically about languages because I feel like that is commonly ignored or forgotten about, but it goes for everything else too. If I give up an ability score improvement so I can get expertise in Arcana and learn Elvish, and then I go 15 sessions in a row where I don't roll a single Arcana check or find a reason to read or speak Elvish, it feels bad. If you have a new player who tries to increase their strength on a wizard, you should obviously just let them know it's not a great idea, but if you have someone who at character creation tells you they want to make a super buff wizard who goes half orc and takes athletics proficiency so they can grapple people and throw them into their cloud of daggers or whatever, let them. That sounds awesome. Give them some grabbable enemies that strategy is effective against. Maybe give them some cliffs to throw people off of as well. Once again, I'm not telling you how to run your games. If everyone at your table is having fun, then that means you're doing everything right, and there's really no correct way to DM. But this is just how I like to run things, and I figured I'd put it out there in case it gives any of you some fun ideas to work with. Thank you for watching, and remember to subscribe if you want to see weekly RPG content.